this video, perhaps two of the most ridiculous road-related penalties that you've ever heard. But in my usual style, I'm going to give you the opposite view to that, and you can make up your mind as to what you really think. And I'd appreciate your thoughts and comments in the box below, because that's where the real conversation is on these videos. And this is where I really truly appreciate you, my community, on this channel. So I'd really appreciate you subscribe to become part of that black belt family. So first up, this disabled badge holders only parking limit to 5 minutes. This lady was fined because she overstayed the 5-minute duration permitted by this parking sign. 5 minutes only and no return within 2 hours. She had wrongly assumed that it was 50 minutes and that the 0 was missing, presumably because she saw the 5 and she assumed that it was 50 minutes. However, the council has responded to say that this is designated only for people dropping somebody off. So it allows for 5 minutes to be dropping off someone who holds a disabled badge near to New Street Station, and they allow 5 minutes to do it. Now, I don't really have much experience assisting those who are disabled to alight from vehicles. However, I would imagine that if you require a wheelchair or some other form of mobility transport, I would think that that probably takes more than 5 minutes to get parked, to open up the vehicle, to take the wheelchair or the mobility scooter out, and then safely secure the person within that transport before moving away from this restricted parking area. I would genuinely think that that takes more than 5 minutes, but as I said, I don't have the experience. So perhaps anyone in the comment section can let me know whether you think that's reasonable, whether 5 minutes is enough, or whether you would reasonably take 10 to 15 minutes would be probably my guess, but I don't really know. So I'd really appreciate your thoughts and comments in the box below. But at first blush, many people might think that this 5-minute restriction is ridiculous altogether. But the council's response is that it's there to allow people quick access to the train station without actually parking. And the council said that there are street parking with longer restrictions, including for those who are disabled, on the nearby streets. So that's the first one that many people may see on first blush as being absolutely ridiculous, but as always, there is another side to it that you might find a little bit more reasonable. The second story that, again, you might think is ridiculous is this one here, where this driver was fined £195 because the driver pulled into a bus lane to allow an emergency vehicle to pass. Emergency vehicle being the police, of course. Now, we all know that feeling of the police, or any emergency vehicle for that matter, coming up behind you with the sirens and the horn and the wailing. Your instinct is to move out of the way. In fact, you are required to allow them to pass. But how do you allow them to pass? Well, the rules say that you're supposed to pull over at the nearest safe opportunity to do so. In this particular case, I can't really see whether or not there was a bus coming. Even if there were, the bus really ought to have been paying attention to the police vehicle anyway. But clearly, this driver had taken the decision to move into the bus lane to allow the police vehicle to pass. Now, you will also see that the road appears to narrow at this point somewhat, going round the bend, and with the police vehicle being so close to this vehicle that's moving out of the way, one can safely assume that the police vehicle was really desperate to get past, and therefore made it known to that driver that they really wanted to get past and that that vehicle should move out of the way. Now, I would proffer the argument that this driver had literally nowhere else to go. They can't go in the way of oncoming traffic. They can't just slam the brakes on and come to a standstill, because that would be dangerous both for the police vehicle and any other vehicle that's following behind. The only alternative I can see that they had was to move over into the bus lane. Now, to be absolutely strict about this, the rules don't permit you to contravene any other road signal, or markings for that matter, including bus lane markings. However, as I've said in previous videos, I do think that certain cases like this do call for some kind of a judgment call on those that are issuing the fines or answering to appeals. If it were me, I think that there would be a reasonable argument to make that this is one of those times when discretion should be had and the fine should be dropped. Because this driver, unless causing any other significant danger, which is not clear from this photograph, but I'm sure it would be if there were such a thing, then ideally the driver really ought to be let off the hook. The counter-argument, of course, which I've implied in my arguments here, is that this could be inherently very dangerous if there is a bus coming down in that lane and doesn't expect the driver to come into the bus lane because they're not supposed to be in the bus lane. And the bus, of course, is a passenger carrying vehicle, likely got dozens of people on board, and thus it is putting all of those lives in further danger and at further risk, particularly if the bus driver does not expect the car to come into that lane. However, as I alluded to earlier, in my view, any bus driver that is or was in that lane at the time ought to be aware of what's going on, because they ought to be aware of the road conditions anyway, and ought to be aware that there's a police vehicle desperately trying to come past. So, in my view, I have to proffer an opinion. I think the driver should be let off the fine for this one. Maybe some of you disagree and think that it's more important that everybody sticks to all of the rules, regardless of a police vehicle coming through. And let's not forget that any incident like this that involves police or police sirens or ambulance or fire or anything else is considered to be an incident related to the emergency services, because after all, they do affect the way other drivers react and how they move and so on. So if there were a collision, it would be designated as a police incident or a police-related collision, because the police van was coming through, presumably with lights on, although it's not clear from this photograph, but presumably they were, and that's why the driver moved out of the way. Speaking to the ITV about this incident, the driver, Stephen, said, "You see the police van coming up and you know you need to do something to help in that situation. They weren't going to be able to get past, so some action was needed. I did it trying to do the right thing, and I've been penalised for that." However, a spokesperson for the council said, "The rules in London are very clear about entering bus lanes, and it's the responsibility of drivers to know and follow them. The driver can be seen moving into the bus lane to let the emergency vehicle pass before proceeding to drive the length of the bus lane, despite having the opportunity to re-enter the carriageway." So the council spokesperson does make a good argument there, in that he spent some time driving in the bus lane afterwards. But again, I could make the counter-argument if I were counsel for the driver, not that this is legal advice, but if I were counsel for the driver mitigating this situation, I would say that in the shock and the aftermath of that situation of moving out of the way for a police vehicle, in perhaps a lapse of judgment following that event, had remained in the bus lane, because, after all, when something like this happens, when any incident happens on the road, you are always going to be thinking about that for the few moments after the event. And it wouldn't have been safe to pull over because it was a bus lane, so either way this is going to have played on his mind somewhat. Of course, there are competing arguments. Follow the rules regardless. Make sure you get out of the bus lane at the earliest opportunity, which perhaps he didn't, as against he was clearly dazed by the situation, clearly just moved into the bus lane to get out of the way of the police vehicle, and then in the moments that followed, presumably dazed by what happened, forgot to come back into the other lane. Most of this, of course, is speculation. This is why when you have legal advice, it would be paramount to sit down, to talk this through, to obtain instructions from a client to see what exactly happened, what was going through your mind at the time, how did you feel, what was happening, all of which in mitigation to try to get this fine dropped. The difficulty we have in these situations is that it would be cost ineffective to instruct lawyers on most of these occasions, because the fines are either under £100 or no more than a couple of £100, by which point you would have spent that on lawyers anyway, and you might feel that it's not cost effective to do so. So ultimately, that's why I make this channel, that's why I bring these discussions to the forefront, so we can all talk about them, and hopefully those that make these rules will take on the views of the general populace. So with that in mind, please do leave me your thoughts and comments below. Make sure you subscribe, that's how my channel grows, and I really want to reach a wider audience as possible. In the meantime, thanks for watching.